Alright, in this video we're going to look at how to select an object here, and realistically it's going to be tricky because this is literally one of the hardest things we ever have to do with hair. You want to select just the hair and not the background, but look at all this different texture in the hair, behind the hair, all these little strands. Let's see what Photoshop can do to play around with this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my object, my layer first, and I already double clicked off the lock, and now I'm just going to go to my select quick selection tool, and I'm just going to quickly select this object. Now I could obviously increase my brush size using the open bracket and close bracket, so I'm just going to start clicking and dragging, and already it does a good job selecting certain areas here, but I'm going to keep going, and obviously it selects a little bit more here too. Now we can go to that later. Let's just keep selecting. I could also zoom in and get a little closer and make my brush a little bit smaller, make it a little bit easier for myself, but you know, it added a little bit extra. But mainly, the main focus is selected. So now to deselect some areas, I'm just going to hold down the command button, and as you can see on my cursor, it turns from a plus to a minus. So holding down option, I'm just going to click and drag, and now it's subtracting some of that space there. Now it's subtracted too much, that's okay. Let's let go of the command and drag a little bit more. And let's go back in, and the more you do it, the more Photoshop recognizes what you're trying to do. This little strand here, let's try to bring that back in, and I'm just going to once again hold down, or not hold down anything, just click and drag. A little bit of the hair up here, even these little strands you might want to try to get, but we're probably going to cut those out anyways. And then obviously here, hold down option and click and drag that out as well. Don't even worry about this. The good thing about the masks is you can control the masks really, really well. The point of what we're doing here is trying to have Photoshop help us as much as possible cut out the hair, or just cut out the object in general, but this hair happens to be very, very difficult to do. I'm just going to get rid of this little guy too. Okay, that's it. Now that I'm close to where I want to be, I'm just going to click on select and mask on the top control panel here. So now what happens, I have a few options here. I can take a look at real-time refinement, which is good. The view, I always like to look at overlay. Overlay is important so you can see what's going to get cut out and what isn't. And when I say cut out, it's going to be masked. So it's still there, but it just won't be able to you could always bring it back, hide it or show it, and that's what masking is all about. So I'm going to look there, and then I'm going to go to remember settings, no, refine mode. In this situation, I want it to be a part of color aware, because object aware, I think we're good there, but it's the color now I think we need to focus on. But let's try out color aware for now. So the very first thing I want to do, I'm going to click on edge detection. I'm going to click on smart radius, and what that does now, it started telling Photoshop you need to fine-tune these edges. And as I bring up the radius, certain things start to happen. Photoshop starts to recognize a little bit more of what's going on the edge. And if I bring it up more and more, you're going to start to see a little bit more hair being shown and a little bit more background being taken away. But also in situations, more hair is taken away. But let's bring it all the way up and see what happens here. Okay, not bad. It actually does a pretty good job, but obviously some red there, meaning that's going to be hidden. But once again, it's a mask. We can always bring it back later. Not a big deal. So we could also play around with our global refinements as well. So let's even just play and see what else we get here. If I move things around, what actually starts to happen. I'm really trying to focus on this hair area and see what is happening here. If I play around with that, smooth really didn't do too much. If I start to bring up feather, what does feather start to do? It feathers out the red. I see what it's doing, and let's see how it really, yeah, that's a little too much, and maybe we want it a little bit tighter, but that's not bad either. But just to know that I can feather those red areas. And then the contrast, let's see how the contrast works. Okay, contrast makes it a little harder, nice sharper, which we could kind of fine tune as well, which actually might come in handy in just a little bit. But I'm going to bring it down just a little bit more. That's really good. Shift edge, let's see what shift edge does for this one. Yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. Okay, not bad. That can definitely help us play around. Because now the next step of this is, after playing around with these kind of automatic tools, we're going to do some manual refinement, and this is the refine edge tool right here on the left hand side, refine edge brush. And what I could do is I could actually now start painting in areas that once I paint, I'm telling Photoshop, focus on this area. There's something wrong with this area, and you need to remove background and bring back some of the foreground. So let's just click and see what happens. So right now, without holding anything, you can see my cursor has a plus sign inside it. I'm just going to click here, see what happens, because I want that red to come back. Nope, didn't do anything. So what I'm going to do instead, I know for a fact I want this not to be masked out. I want to be able to see it. I'm going to hold down the Option key and just click and drag, and then that's just going to bring it back 100%. Now I have an area here, like even inside here. Let's look at this blue area plus the hair. I'm just going to click and drag right here. It might go a little slower on your computer depending on what you're doing. And now what it did, see what it did? It brought in that red, meaning it's going to try to cut out as much of that as possible. I'm going to do the same thing here. And once again, this is literally the hardest thing you ever have to cut out in Photoshop. You're cutting out little pieces, little strands of something, very inconsistent organic materials against a textured background. Like, that's very difficult. If I had a solid, flat, black, white, green background, whatever, something opposite to what the foreground is, so easy to do. But in this case, very, very difficult. But I just want to show, using the Refine Edge tool, how far we can get with that. And once again, I'm just going to click and drag here. I can maybe make my brush a little bigger, or fine tune it and squeeze and make it smaller and zoom in. But I'm just going to play around and see what I can get. Now the same thing happens here. I'm just going to move over. I know I want this hair in, so I'm just going to hold down Command and click, and kind of paint that hair back in, and let Photoshop know, like, no, you need to keep this part. Okay, and it does okay job considering. But once again, we could always go back when the mask is made. We can go back and cut some of this area out. Once again, this arm, well, I definitely need that arm. So once again, I'm going to hold down Command, which minuses. Say, no, I definitely want that back. I'm going to play around with these edges here, see if that works at all. Not bad, not great. Once again, we can cut that out a little bit later. Let's even see what it does here. If it cuts out any of those darker areas. A little bit, not too much. Okay, let's go over here. Yeah, same idea. We can cut that out. Oh, it took a little too much of that dress out. I don't want to keep that in. Once again, I could change that later. Same with this. Zoom out and try to get rid of this area here. Try to get rid of this big area. I know I'm doing kind of a big brush at once. Just kind of want to see what it does. And I could always go back in and fine tune if I need to. Hold down Option, get rid of that area. Okay, it's not horrible. Once again, we could always go back and play around with it a little bit more. And I kind of like what they did up here. And you can see how if you really put on contrast, you might get it to be really, really tight, which you may or may not need depending on the background you're going to put it on. Because if the background in the back is a stark, certain color, that's fine. If it's going to be textured, maybe some of this stuff gets hidden. But either way, let's assume we're happy with that. It looks okay. It's not great. We know that, but we could always play around with it later and really fine tune it. So now what I want to do, let's even look at decontaminate colors. So it's going to not, what it does, it takes the color from the foreground and the background and tries to figure out what might be best for the edge, what might be better for the foreground versus the background, and get rid of those colors that interfere. But as it looks for me, I'm going to keep it off. Now the output selection, this is the important part. So everything should be shown here, and I'm just going to say new layer with layer mask. So it's going to actually duplicate this layer that I already had and add a layer mask to it. There's other options where you could just add a layer mask directly to it. It's just a new layer on its own, but I like new layer with layer mask. I have those editable options, non-destructive, really great way to do it, and I'm just going to say okay. And now I have that. So what I could do too, just to give myself an idea of what the background might be, because right now with this no background idea, and you see how messy it is too, I'm just going to give myself a little background. I'm just going to click on here and say solid color, and I'm going to bring it to, well, actually let's change the color right now. Just for now, I'm just going to black, which I shouldn't because she's black. Then she's got a black dress. I'm just going to bring it underneath, and there I am, and that's what it looks like. Okay, cool. Now that's not horrible, but maybe to get a better sense of how I'm going to mask this, maybe that might be ideal. So the mask is already set. Well, once again, it's a new layer with layer mask. Now if I click on this mask, if I brush on white, more is going to show. It's going to show more. White shows more, black hides more. So with this make sure the layer mask is selected, not the picture. You see how this little border shows up? Make sure the layer mask is selected, and now you can paint. Because if I were to paint on this, well, that's what happens. I'm painting red, the foreground color. If I paint on the mask, it automatically turns to white and black because that's all you can paint. And I could bring more of that background back in. You see how I'm bringing that background back in? Well, let's look at my brush too. Right now my brush, the opacity is at 25%. Let's bring it up to 100 just to show you. I could play with the flow. I could play with the different types of brushes I want. If I want a really hard edge to make a nice crisp edge, or if I want it to kind of more feather out, let's go with a hard round. And I'm just going to once again click there, and this time I'm going to switch up the foreground to be black, and now I'm going to take away. And now to do that, to be really precise, I can really come and zoom in close and really play around. And this is where that kind of, it's a little tedious, but if you take your time with it, make it look really good, you can really redefine the edges and get rid of all that extra background space that you don't need. I'm not going to take too much time here to do that, but realistically, you can really zoom in really close and really clean that up. A few different ways to do that. Obviously this brush way, but definitely always with the mask. If you even want to use the path tool, the pen tool to make a path, you can, but you see how we're kind of cleaning up some of these areas. And once again, maybe we're not happy with the way the arm is because we need to see a little bit more of that area. I'm going to switch to white again, and this time I'm going to paint it back in. And I'm going to try to do it where I don't actually bring back any of that background either. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller using the bracket keys, and now I'm just bringing back this area here. And once again, you kind of really would fine tune, zoom in closer, and change up your brush size as I'm doing here to make it exactly the way you want. And you can really reshape anything you want this way, clean anything up. Something that happens to be bothering the picture, doesn't work well. So that's how more or less we do it. To clean everything up, try to find those edges. So I did a pretty good job with these individual strands, but you see there's some gray there, there's some gray areas. So depending on your background color, what you choose to do, you might really have to clean it up. But the idea would be to select a color, play with it as is, and then start to play around with your color in the mask as well. And that's how the Refine Edge tool works, Selected Mask works, and playing with layer masks in general. Now looking at this file again, but this time doing something a little bit different, I'm going to do the same thing I just did with the quick selection tool. And once again, I'm going to do it rather quickly, but still give it a little bit of time and get rid of the background and not make it so perfect as last time. I gave it a little extra time. This time I'm going to say, let's do the select mask as well, selected mask, but this time I'm going to choose the object aware as opposed to the color aware. I'm going to choose object aware and bring up that radius and smart radius. Already we start to see a really much cleaner edge. So as Photoshop is using the object, trying to look for object edges as opposed to color edges, which makes more sense. This is already looking a little bit better. The arms are looking a lot better. There's a cleaner edge there. Now this, you're going to have issues like this. So once again, if we refine that edge and kind of try to paint this in, even the painting's a little bit differently where it's looking for bigger blocks of areas. We could bring that in and let's see what happens. And it does okay, but it doesn't do great. So I'm just going to hold on Option and subtract and make sure Photoshop knows I really want this area. And that didn't work that well either. So once again, we might have to bring that back in with just masking once we're done here. But other than that, that's okay. We can leave that. But now, once again, if I go back in here with the Refine Edge brush inside this really tricky area, it doesn't do a bad job. It does pretty good trying to get rid of some of that blue, and even in here, this darker area that is actually just the dark of the tree, it tries to find the object, the shape, which I think that's exactly what it does. It finds it. So the object aware and color aware, both somewhat different, and they both provide slightly different options, but depending on what you're actually trying to find and those edges of a solid object or something a little trickier like this, you might want to even try out object aware in this situation, or color aware depending on what you're trying to do there. I'll go to try a new layer with layer mask, and once again, if I have that background, I'll just say okay. I'm going to add a background to it, solid color. Right now that's fine. I'll bring it back down here and change up the color to whatever. It ended up being a slightly better than the color version. So if I go back here and I'm going to bring back in some of that, oh, wrong, see, once again, I made that mistake. Make sure you're on the mask, make sure you're painting white, bring back in some of that hair, you know, wherever I wanted that to be, and then I can go back in and try to, you know, get rid of, find those edges. But once again, that's really tricky. And the whole point of using the refine edge brush, or, you know, selected mask, is to get rid of those really fine areas. So like I said, I didn't do a great job. I could have spent more time with it, but just to show you the difference between color and object aware.